Here's a more complete picture of some of the things that we might get. I don't expect you guys to read all this verbatim. Let me just try to break down some of the big things to consider. This is the whole set of technologies for the actual UI. So again, if you're a WPF person, or if you're a Silverlight person, you would now be using these different windows.ui.something to build out the UI. You can see that a lot of our old friends are here. We have a XAML incarnation, right? We have a whole bunch of controls that automatically take on the Metro style look and feel. Right? We have a whole set of animation services, which are very similar to the WPF animation services. Okay. And then if I come over to the right-hand side here, plenty of things for graphics that work in conjunction with that. And then even more pieces here for working with user interactions beyond what we get from the .NET subset. So, for better or for worse, we're back at the bottom of the mountain, right? We can certainly leverage our skills, but yep, there'll be a whole new stack of libraries to dive into and see what's going on with. If you prefer to work with web technologies, then you're also in the game. One thing which I think is pretty interesting is you can build out your Metro style apps using HTML5 for the UI and using JavaScript for your application logic. So this is pretty compelling, you know. I've typically found that programmers are really in one of two camps. I mean, either you're going to commit your talents and your time to being a web person, or you commit your talents and your time to being a desktop person. Because there's such dramatically different ways of programming, right? And both of these ways of programming are just so feature-rich, and they have so many things to know, it's pretty darn impossible to be an expert at everything, right? I know I'm not. So, this is great, you know. If you're currently an OO kind of person, like myself, you can just dive right into your language of choice, and you can tap into all the XAML and go to town, right? We can also, though, as we see here, right, we can tap into the HTML there, JavaScript, and all of our .NET languages here. Right? In fact, if you've played around with Blend 5, you can actually build out a Metro-style application. One of your new project choices is if you want to tap into HTML5. So we have really good support there as well. Now, many, many, many moons ago, I was pretty knee-deep in the world of COM. So I was all about implementing IUnknown and making class factories and endless registration scripts for my COM objects. And that just felt like such an old-school thing to me, right? Because now, as I've been doing .NET for a number of years, I'm much, much happier not implementing 85 interfaces per class. So I find it really funny that if you start to go way under the covers of how the WinRT runtime is working, these suckers are COM objects. And when I realized this, I just had to give myself a little bit of a chuckle. We typically never ever see it come through in our code because of this projection layer. But all these different services that I was mentioning, like these contracts and, you know, talking to the operating system through the Metro layers, you're actually bumping into COM objects in the background. Now remember, COM objects, you know, they had their own form of metadata, right? They had this stuff called a type library that was a compiled version of IDL code. So to express the metadata of the COM object to a way that the Metro mindset, the HTML5, the C#, and so forth, the way that they can understand it, is we actually have this registered Windows metadata. And if you start to reference libraries in Visual Studio, you'll notice that you're just referencing this big, huge blob of metadata. Right? The actual real functionality of how these objects do their work is actually back there in that lower level COM layer. So that is pretty interesting. So there's a whole bunch of different projections that will map to various languages. You know, all the ones that I just talked about are already in place. And I'm assuming different vendors can make, make a layer for their own custom languages too, just like we can tap into the CTS to build implementations of, IronPython or Lisp. So for all we know, we might be building Metro-style apps with COBOL, which would be very frightening to me. Okay, so we kind of went through the user perspective a little bit, gave you a little bit of information about the developer perspective, and I think a lot of us would like to stop there, because if you're like me, right, we're kind of more interested in twiddling the bits, and we don't often think about the monetary part as far as getting it to market. I mean, we think about it to some level, but I think it's a little bit of a different mindset for a lot of us. Here, though, a little bit more important, I suppose, because if you're going to be building a Metro-style app, your ultimate goal is you want to get that sucker uploaded to the Windows Store, right? And then other folks can have the option of actually purchasing your app, okay? So Microsoft has tried pretty hard, I think, to make this fairly transparent and not too painful. One thing which is pretty nice is that once you go ahead and get your price set in the local currency, the store kind of helps map things to different currencies, which is kind of cool. If you want to get these things uploaded to the Windows Store, for better or for worse, we do need to have a registered app developer certificate. Okay, so that can be a bit of a cost. I mean, for a corporate IT environment, not too terribly painful at all. Even for a single user license is pretty reasonable. This was based on data that I saw a couple months ago. I think it's the same, but don't quote me on the actual cost. But $50 for a year for a person isn't too horrible. Okay. So you got the application done, you have your license, and now you want to upload things. Okay, well, this is where you're going to have to go through a certification process. Right? Now, here is a URL, and if you get I think the slides for this are posted. No, the video is going to be posted. But if you just do a, App Store vetting search, you'll probably find the same URL. But basically, your application is going to go through a whole bunch of different tests by those kind folks at Microsoft. And I kind of tried to highlight in red the big things that we need to be aware of. So let me just kind of hit those. The application, this one's kind of like a duh, but you'd be surprised. It needs to be a fully functional app. You can't upload an app that the user can't actually use until they download 75 extra things for cost. It needs to be a fully functional app when they get it. And that doesn't mean you can't have things they could download later, but you need to make a respectable application, right? There is a one tile per app idea, so there shouldn't be 20 icons on the Windows start screen that represent your app, which is different, right? Because for a traditional distribution of a desktop program under Windows 7, for example, if I just do that right now, if I just go to my start menu, I could go to Visual Studio. I'm going to get a whole bunch of different components, right, that work together to give Visual Studio all of its functionality. So here we're trying to get things isolated to one tile. Now here's another big one, and this has some interesting implications if you ask me. We need to use those APIs that have been deemed worthy for Metro-style apps. So what does that mean about third-party libraries? What does that mean about maybe, other frameworks? I'm sure that there's plenty of ways that Microsoft is going to work with that. But basically what this means to us is we need to be careful about any kind of crazy interop situations, perhaps. Remember that touch screen is not optional, right? We do need to have an application that does respond to all those touch screen pieces that I kind of enumerated through in other slides. And the final part is be nice. Don't make dastardly, mean-spirited programs, and keep it clean, too. Now, Microsoft does give us a full app certification kit and that's actually installed when you install Visual Studio, and that helps you do some pre-testing, and it will kind of flag out things that are in direct violation of these different principles, sort of almost like FX Cop, FX Cop for profit for a Metro app.